everybody. Welcome back to Natural Doctors. I'm naturopathic Dr. Katie Dinello.
And I'm Dr. Jen Stagg. Today we're going to talk about fighting inflammation with food primarily. So Dr. Katie, why don't you get us started?
Absolutely. All right. So first of all, I have to say, I absolutely love talking about nutrition. So naturopathic doctors use a lot of different modalities to treat patients. We use herbs, we use supplements, we use homeopathy, physical medicine, but food is definitely my favorite. So I have a bachelor's in nutrition. So before I even went to naturopathic medical school, I studied nutrition. So I really believe it is a foundation to health. So when it comes to inflammation, we can eat foods that either trigger inflammation or help stop inflammation. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's start by talking a little bit about inflammation in general. So inflammation is our body's natural process for fighting off infections, diseases. We all need inflammation. Small amounts of inflammation are normal, and that's called acute inflammation, right? We all know this. We get a cut on our finger, it turns red, and it gets puffy and swollen, and there you go. That's inflammation. Mm-hmm. Where the real problem comes into play is when we have chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is kind of like a pot of simmering water. It hasn't quite boiled over yet, but it's there. And the problem with chronic inflammation is that it is present, but we don't really feel it, right? So it kind of presents as fatigue, maybe chronic infections, brain fog, or our patients are just coming in and they really are not feeling well. So Dr. Jen, how do you find that patients come into practice saying like they have certain symptoms? Like what symptoms make you think, oh, this patient probably has some chronic inflammation?
Right. So it's so interesting because inflammation now is also a buzzword, right? So patients are online, they're looking at their social media and they come in. So some of them are actually coming in, they're saying like, do I have inflammation? I think I have inflammation. So then we're checking this, which as you know, we can do lab tests to check for inflammation. But some of the things that make me really think about inflammation in patients are symptoms like achiness, like stiff joints, like certainly as we age, we're all going to start inflammaging, right? So we're going to all have some degree of inflammation with age, but also certain medical conditions will set someone up to have more issues with chronic inflammation. So any patient that presents with metabolic syndrome, pre-diabetes, heart disease, of course, obesity, all of those, and autoimmune disease, a host of different conditions, those patients are going to have chronic inflammation, this unresolved inflammation that's not getting turned off.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I see in my practice too, right? These patients coming in and they're saying, I've got joint pain, brain fog, fatigue, and that's what cues us into looking at certain inflammatory markers. So you mentioned we can measure these markers, right? A couple of those might be something called an ESR or a CRP, if any of our listeners or watchers have heard of those before, right? Those are really easy lab tests and they're a great starting point to see if you have inflammation. So the bigger picture here is what foods are actually contributing to inflammation, because our bodies produce inflammation naturally every day. Just their chemical reactions, just being alive produces inflammation, right? But if we're eating the right foods, those foods can combat those small levels of inflammation. However, if we're eating inflammatory foods, that's going to contribute to things like oxidative stress and other kinds of inflammation. So let's talk about those foods and what they are. Do you see a couple of foods that patients are continuously coming in saying that they eat and you're like, oh yeah,
that will cause inflammation. Right. So we know like the standard American diet, which is highly processed, is going to be highly inflammatory, right? So the majority of patients that we see are, like a lot of our patients are actually, pretty healthy in terms of their choices. Like they're coming in to see a naturopathic doctor. So a lot of times they're sort of a little bit more aligned and they're shopping at Whole Foods and, they're trying to make some better choices. But a lot of times then we start like looking exactly at what they're eating and we go like, oh, there's some stuff in here that's not so good.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is where we get into ultra processed food. right? So a lot of those ingredients in packaged foods that you can't pronounce or you don't find as kitchen ingredients, that's what I tell patients. And it's affecting their microbiome, which then is causing inflammation. So there's that whole issue there. And then, of course, a lot of people understand like inflammation in terms of like a lot of saturated fat in the diet, trans fats. I feel like people do a pretty good job at avoiding trans fats now. But conventionally raised animal products are highly, highly inflammatory.
Exactly.
And then not enough plants in the diet, right? So you've got this like really shifted balance. People are overdoing it on animal protein and just, racking up grams of protein, and they're not getting enough plants. And if you're not getting enough plants, then you don't have good control of oxidative stress, and then that causes inflammation.
Yes, 100%. I couldn't agree more. Let's talk about the meat craze and the protein craze more specifically. So right now, all over social media, protein, it's all about protein. And don't get me wrong, protein is amazing. We need protein. It's the building blocks of our tissues, our muscles. But what a lot of people don't realize is that many Americans already overconsume calories. And when we're over-consuming calories and then adding more protein on top of it, that protein can't be stored. So that protein, those amino acids, can actually get turned into fatty acids, which a lot of people don't know the biochemistry behind there. So that's an important piece. But as Jen was saying, that extra protein, because you're already over-consuming calories from mostly carbohydrates, right? That is going to be inflammatory and cause oxidative stress. Now, lean proteins, right? We kind of say you want to eat proteins as close to the source as possible. So salmon, right? Grass-fed meats, things like that, really great for us, but not when we're already over-consuming calories. So we like protein. We encourage our patients to eat protein, but not too much, right? And I'm sure you get asked this question all the time. What is that perfect amount of protein that I need? And that's a really nuanced question, right? It really depends on the patient. We're also starting to see a little bit more literature saying that overconsumption of protein might have some cancer effects too. That's pretty new research, but it's definitely out there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of the misinformation that I see are that people are trying to get a gram per pound of body weight of protein. So if we take an example of that, if someone's 170 pounds, consuming 170 grams of protein, that's a lot of protein. First of all, it's hard to do. A lot of times those calories are going to like really add up because they're coming from animal protein for the most part that is also accompanied by animal fat. And then they're going way over on calories. So it's just like, it's first of all, hard to do, but second of all, it's not good for your biochemistry. No. So really, I almost think some of these influencers don't like understand that the data is actually on grams per kilogram. Like they're not even doing that conversion. So some of that was based on 1 gram per kilo of body weight. And what you're referencing about cancer, it's actually even less than that, right? That you go down to more sort of like 0.8. So there's a lot to know still, I think. But like bottom line, people are a lot of people are overdoing it.
Exactly. And then, you mentioned these ingredients that we can't really read. So an example of this would be emulsifiers, right? So those mono or diglycerides that you sometimes see, carrageenan, polysorbate, these are all emulsifiers in our foods. And those are important in processed foods because they keep things like oil and water together so that things mix well, they have good textures, but those can cause a lot of oxidative stress as well too. The other thing is insulin, right? And glucose. So when we're eating a lot of simple sugars, they're spiking our insulin, which also contributes to inflammation. And the other point I want to make that's, I think, really important that is very under talked about in nutrition is that processed meats like bacon, salami, right, things like that, those contribute to AGEs or advanced glycation end products, which cause a lot of oxidative stress.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we were even having this conversation recently about people who are following keto diets. And they, of course, like, you know, if you really like animal protein, keto diet sounds pretty attractive.
Right.
And so people are eating like charcuterie boards.
Yeah.
For meals.
For every meal.
Which there has to be something wrong with that, right? Like that does not sound like that's okay.
Exactly.
So a lot of times, you know, I've had plenty of conversations where we're educating about keto and more of a clean keto, right? Just for these reasons, because it's not always just about, again, like grams of fat. It's like, where are those calories actually coming from?
Exactly. Yep, I agree. And then we also have to talk about the gut a little bit here. So when it comes to the connection between food, inflammation in the gut, we think about food sensitivities. So food sensitivities are a hot topic as well. We'll touch on them briefly here because we could do a whole episode on that probably. But there are some people where they eat certain foods and they do trigger inflammatory reactions in the gut, right? Do you test for food sensitivities in your patients a lot? Are you seeing that?
Yeah, well, I do a good amount of it. So we're looking at food intolerances, but more specifically, like over the years, there have been some really great testing companies that have really presented, and the results are a lot more applicable in clinical practice in terms of the patient follows those food sensitivity eliminations and they actually feel better and their inflammatory markers come down. And so, you know, when I was a student, I remember there were some of our co-students that actually did testing on themselves. And so there was a lot of invalid testing, right? They sent the same samples to the same company and they're getting different results back. They're sending it to other companies, getting different results back. So when we think about food sensitivities, yes, like I think that it is an important part of the picture, but you need to make sure you're choosing the right test. So we, and I know you do this as well, we use this testing that combines both IgG and complement. So we're actually looking to see if a food is producing inflammation in the gut, right? Because that's what's key. And then most importantly, when you have patients, you know, they're investing in having that test and then they're going to put the effort into eliminating those foods, which can be challenging depending on what comes up there. You want them to actually feel better, right? And actually see results. And so, yeah, it is a great tool. I know, you know, that you have patients that have had great results with that as well.
I have, yeah. And I couldn't agree more. Food sensitivity testing, the science behind it has come a long way. So it is very impressive now what we can do. That combination that you mentioned of IgG and complement, these are two immune particles that we can measure. And the thing about food sensitivities is if you're continuing to expose your gut lining to those foods, you're creating, you know, what we call leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability. And when we eliminate those foods, we can help heal the gut, reduce that inflammation. So yeah, really important there. Okay, so let's talk about foods that actually help fight inflammation, right? So those are a lot of foods that contribute to inflammation, but what about foods that are helpful? These aren't going to be surprising to anyone, but we can all use more of these. So I'll start here. My favorite to recommend to patients, I always tell them you need more dark berries in your life, right? Those, what we call anthocyanins, are really powerful antioxidants. So here's a point where we want to talk a little bit more about oxidative stress. Dr. Jen, you're kind of an expert on this topic. Do you want to talk a little bit about how oxidative stress contributes to inflammation?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, oxidative stress is, the way to think about it is that obviously people are familiar with that term antioxidants. So these are fighting oxidative stress or free radicals. So that's a term that, you know, I think some people are familiar with, or a good amount of people are familiar with. And when you have too many free radicals, they need to get basically quenched. And there are two different ways that happen. So first way is that our body has these natural mechanisms that control oxidative stress. And the other way is that you do it through food, right? So just like these berries, these foods that are rich in polyphenols and antioxidants, they're having a dual effect. Like they can directly quench those free radicals, but they also upregulate our own pathway. So then we can quench those free radicals as well with our systems. Now, some people have actual genetic variants in their oxidative stress genes. And so it can get them more sort of impaired ability to control those free radicals. And that means that we really have to push those antioxidant containing foods.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. And so moving on then, we've got dark leafy greens. These are another great one that I know a lot of you aren't eating, at least for my patients. So one of my favorite tips here for improving those dark colors in your diet is really to just put everything you eat on a bed of greens, right? Just put some greens on there. They have to be dark, not the iceberg lettuce. That's a huge pet peeve of mine, right? But those dark leafy greens especially have vitamin K, which helps with plaque regression, right? And stabilizing our arteries, keeping our vessels really healthy. So that's an important piece too. The next thing that I really like to tell patients is we want to be eating cruciferous vegetables. So these are things like your broccoli, your Brussels sprouts, your kale, your cabbage. What else? I think I got most of them there. Yeah. And these have something called sulforaphane in them, and it's very anti-cancer. It's a great compound in these. So I tell my patients to eat a lot of those. What about carbohydrates? Talk to us about healthy carbohydrates versus processed carbohydrates, because I don't know about you, I do a lot of weight loss in my clinic, and the first thing that a lot of my patients say is I don't eat any carbs. And I'm like, well, let's talk about this here. It's nuanced. You don't eat processed carbs, but whole grains, right? Healthy carbohydrates are still really important.
Yeah, so it's like it's a lot to unpack for people, right? So there, again, a lot of misinformation about carbohydrates in general, and they'll say like they're no carb or low carb, and then you start looking at their diet, and there's plenty of starches. So that's how we need to start thinking about it is, what are the sources of carbohydrate? Are these grains? Are they starchy vegetables? Are they more fibrous sort of vegetables, right? So if you were actually eating a vegan diet, you'd be getting, it's all carbs, right? Exactly. Like for a lot of carbs anyway. So your vegetables are good sources of carbohydrate. Where we run into more of an issue is where people are eating these like really fast burning like starches that are spiking blood sugar, right? So as you mentioned, when blood sugar levels elevate and we have things like insulin resistance, that's going to cause like inflammation and all these, chronic issues that people will run into. So now we do still want to think about like the total amount of starch coming in. So even though someone is actually eating healthy, organic whole grains and they're eating organic, root vegetables, they could still be overdoing it, right? So if that's where we start to go like, okay, well, let's actually talk about this portion size and let's get people understanding how many calories they're consuming a day, because you can actually end up packing on the calories with too much like rice. So people, instead of that bed of green vegetables, it may be a bit like a lot of people are a bed of rice, right? Absolutely. A bit like it's a pasta dish, and then they have like a little bit on top. So it's really keeping that portion size pretty small and then balancing it out with a lot more vegetables, right? And then some lean protein and healthy fats.
Exactly. Agreed. All right, I want to talk about one more thing, and then we're going to talk about the frequency of food, which is a really important topic. So the last thing I want to mention before that is we haven't talked about omegas and fatty acids yet, things like fish oil. So an important topic here, seed oils. I'm sure you've all seen it. It's all over my Instagram. Maybe it's not for yours, but that's what I'm looking at these days. So this is a very hot topic. Essentially, seed oils are a problem when we overconsume them, okay? Getting a little bit of seed oil in your diet is not a bad thing. They're high in omega-6s. We need omega-6s in our bodies, right? They're part of cell membranes, really important functions in our body. But when we overconsume those omega-6s compared to omega-3s, that's when we can get more inflammation here. So I tend to tell my patients, we try to stay away from seed oils, and really we want to replace those with omega-3 fatty acids from salmon, fattier fishes like mackerel, if you like sardines. I don't, but, and then things like flax seeds, chia seeds, walnuts, really high in omega-3s.
Right, exactly. So it's really, again, back to that whole concept of a whole food, right? So seed oils come from seeds. Now, I don't think it's a problem if people are eating like flax seeds and they're eating chia seeds, but once you start manipulating any sort of food, then we start to get potentially some imbalances, right? You're taking that fiber away, you're taking those minerals out. You know, when you have an oil like sunflower oil, right? Like that's very different than eating sunflower seeds.
Right.
And I don't have a problem with that. Now, of course, some people may have intolerances or they could certainly like overdo it on these seeds. It's very easy to do that. But again, these are, you know, easy ways to kind of like manipulate your diet and watch out for. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. All right. So we're going to end our show with these next couple of minutes by talking about the frequency of food. So this is a topic that not a lot of people are talking about, at least I don't think, and it's important. So everything emits energy, right? And part of that energy is what we call biophotons, which are kind of these light particles. I know, this is a hard concept to understand, right? And with that energy comes frequency, right? Humans emit frequencies, our food emits frequencies, everything emits frequencies. And inflammation is considered very low frequency. It's very chaotic inflammation in our body. And those low frequencies can perpetuate and cause, you know, that oxidative stress that you were talking about. Other foods that are kind of aligned with that inflammation that also emit low frequencies are processed foods, right? No surprise there. But plants, right? Herbs, vegetables, fruits, these are all really high frequency foods. And so we can quite literally raise our vibrations when we eat high frequency foods. And this really matters, right? So we want to think about that spiritual connection to food. Every time we eat, it's an opportunity to connect with the earth, to connect with our food. Food is really this bridge between science and spirituality. So we get that opportunity every time we eat food. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. And you know, like we have these conversations.
Yeah, all the time.
All the time. But I mean, an easy way for people to think about that, just like you mentioned, like processed food, it's like dead. Like, so just think about it in terms of that concept of energy. And if you picked like fresh herbs in your garden, think about how vibrant and how much like actual energy there is in there. That's a lot more alive. Also, another concept to consider is, you know, the freshness of your food and how long like food is getting transported. So if you're getting food from like your produce from South America, yes, that's still better than a processed food, of course. But the frequency is going to start dropping, right? Because of the amount of transport versus when you go to your local farmer and get your food there, or you're going to a farmer's market. So these are concepts that a lot of people aren't talking about, right? And I think it is important for people to understand that and try to eat more fresh food. And even, you know, growing some herbs at home, right? Like it's so easy to do. And this is like one way that you can really get a big punch of nutrition. So you're getting a high frequency, but herbs are just packed with antioxidants and phytochemicals, and they're one of my favorite anti-inflammatory approaches for dietary.
Yeah, I love that, right? And like you said, it really is such a simple step. I mean, not all of us have the ability to go to a nice farmer's market every week or to buy organic foods, right? You do what you can, that's okay. But it really is simple to grow a couple of herbs in your home. Just put them on your windowsill, right? You don't have to water them too much, they'll survive. And then you sprinkle those in your food, right? Even dried herbs. Yes, we would prefer fresh, but even using dried herbs.
Right, they're still going to be packed with those phytochemicals. The frequency may be a little bit lower, right, than the fresh version, but it's a fantastic way to have like, you know, an improvement in the quality of your dietary intake.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we had to end on that note by raising our frequency by eating fresh foods, of course. That's all we have time for today, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on The Natural Doctors.
Nick Augustino right here at the East Side Restaurant. We always have the complete full dinner menu. Knockwurst, bratwurst, sauerbraten, potato pancakes, red cabbage, rice pudding, cream pies, all the desserts that Germany had to offer. I always do something different. Yes, I do. I brought seafood to the beer garden at the East Side Restaurant. East Side Restaurant, your German destination restaurant in Connecticut. Tiki-taka, hoy, hoy, hoy!
I'm your host, Kurt Barwis. Today, I have a very special guest, Dr. Andrew Lim.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Veterans Corner. My name's Chuck Wooden.
Decision for ourselves for this week, if we want to be made well.
Hi, welcome to the crack of dawn. It's Dawn Lombardi. I'm starting the painting. It's going to be the cliffs with some water. Love it.
He took me on the sets of Lost in Space, Batman.
Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time,